Welcome to the Global Journalism Seminars. This is The Briefing. Continuing our focus on election coverage, we're zeroing in on the work of Meedan this week. Founded in 2006, this Skoll Innovation Award-winning nonprofit has developed open-source software and training programs in 17 languages used by 170 newsrooms in 46 countries, all in pursuit of a higher quality information pipeline for informed electorates. We polled our journalist fellows ahead of this seminar to ask, what do you consider the most significant challenge for journalists covering elections in the current media landscape? 17% said verifying the authenticity of information. 17% said ensuring the safety and security of journalists. 66% said engaging and maintaining audience trust. Our guest today is Dr. Dima Saber, Director of Programs and Impact Lead at Meedan. Dr. Saber previously worked in Media and Culture Studies at Birmingham University and has worked on citizen journalism projects in countries like Lebanon, Egypt, Syria, Yemen, and Palestine. We'll ask about Meedan's programs and any patterns they've seen emerging around election misinformation this year. That's The Briefing. Let's begin. Thanks for joining us at the Global Journalism Seminars today as 2024's election coverage demands continue to grow louder and more complex with every passing day. But determined not to be swallowed by all the negativity, today we'll spend an hour with someone who is wholly focused on solution hacking, Dr. Dima Saber, who is Director of Programs and Impact Lead at Meedan. Dima, thank you so much for joining us today and congrats on the Skoll Award.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here. And yes, very exciting about the Skoll Award.
As we've established, it's a bumper election year. I know your teams are just wrapping up in India and Mexico. Where else is 2024 taking your team?
Let me first start with sharing my screen, if you can confirm. You can actually see it. Great. So yes, I mean, 2024 is a huge election year for us. I know there's a lot that's come in the media about the amount of voters. So I've got here sort of like an overview list of all the countries that have just wrapped up election projects. So we finished everything you see on the screen from Pakistan up to Mongolia. Mongolia is just ongoing in June, and we're prepping for Brazil and the US in November 2024. And actually just yesterday, we started the conversation about what we could do potentially with the UK and France elections, because both have come in a bit of a surprise.
Yeah.
And, adapt.
Two surprise extras for you to look at. A busy agenda then. It's not just election work though, is that? Maybe you could give us a program of how all the Meedan programs are structured.
Absolutely. But just before we dive into the non-election framework, well, I think the one thing I wanted to add is, irrespectively of where we're looking, so in any of these countries, there's definitely one trend circulating across, which is that information inequality. So people's lack of access to information that they need, that is suited for their communities and languages, does destabilize democracy and has got huge effects on what we perceive as the critical issues to look at. And I feel like there is a point there, hopefully we'll pick this up in the Q&A, about the role of journalism and journalists and newsrooms in addressing the needs of the people and the communities we're trying to serve. So in terms of what else we do, Meedan's got a very important focus on the larger world, which is our preferred denomination of the Global South. So we currently have about 65 partners in 45 countries, and together we focus on three main verticals, if you want. So information integrity is one of them, and obviously our work on elections and on equitable AI solutions and tools is at the heart of that. We've got a vertical on building preparedness and response to crisis, and we look at crisis in a very large sort of definitions. So this could be a health crisis, it could be a natural disaster, it could be a political crisis, democratic transition, etc. And then all the work that goes into contributing to safe and inclusive ecosystems. So this is our work on countering gender disinformation and hate speech online, especially in underserved context and with communities that are not necessarily served by the current offerings of and affordances of the tech.
Mm. Thanks, Dima. Let's circle back then to what you were saying about information integrity and these elections. A question that's come up again and again is the role of generative AI and how it's changing the information landscape. Have you seen it affecting the flow of information in the 2024 campaigns?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, obviously there's this like massive hype on AI, right? Like every once in a while, people just get excited. A couple of years ago, it was fact checking. Everybody was talking about it. Now people seem to have like moved beyond it, and now it's about AI. So there's a lot of the work that we're doing that goes into also deconstructing these like big terms, right? Like how do we make conversations about AI and about machine learning models more accessible? How do we explain to people that's actually a computer program that you can teach it to using data from the internet to, better response to queries and needs of specific people? So there are ways to move beyond just like the over sensationalist narrative about, the hype around AI. What's definitely sure, though, and this is a trend we've seen across elections. Just as I was getting ready for this conversation, I was looking at the trends that our team have brought in since we wrapped up Mexico and India. So these were the last two election projects, and I was just looking at the claims and the fact checks that we looked with the two elections. There's definitely an issue with the effect of Gen AI on the information that's circulating in times of election. The truth is that bad actors, or however we want to call them, Gen AI has made it possible for them to produce media content, deepfakes, videos, text, images, which are generated by AI, so they're not real media content and read images, and to use those images to discredit their opponents. So we've seen Gen AI being used as a tool of political communication with close to no regulation whatsoever. And where it becomes a really important issue, and where the heart of our work at Meedan sits, is that we're trying to do this work in closed messaging apps. And the reason why this is very important is that these spaces are encrypted, so they're end-to-end encrypted, and so they're unregulated. And so misinformation, disinformation, political candidates can reach out to voters, and all this can spread virally with no oversight really from tech platforms. So despite all the funding that's gone into supporting mis and disinformation work and campaigns for the last decade, very, very little happened on closed messaging apps. And this is where the effects of Gen AI are obviously the most felt and the most used.
Can I ask a quick follow-up question there? I know that you're still wrapping up the reports on India, and maybe it's too soon to ask this question, but obviously the closed messaging ecosystem was particularly problematic for India in the last election. Have the balances put in place made any difference?
It's too early to tell,
Really?
as we're literally just only analyzing data as it comes out. One trend that we've definitely seen, for example, a surge on India trends this year is much more conversation, questions, answers, Gen AI generated content on sectarian narratives. So, and it's really interesting to see how there is actually a direct correlation between the general, atmosphere in a country. So we know the Indian government has been feeding into a sectarian narratives for years in India, and anti-Muslim, a narrative that has, even gone beyond India. We've seen effects between Indian claims and the Gaza war in a completely different setting in Israel and Palestine. So it's really interesting to see, because we're able to look at how trends are circulating across in the lead up to the election. This is the point I wanted to come to, is that it's not enough to look at what's happening on election day. It actually is more important to look at in the period leading up to election, and to stick around a little bit after the election as the narratives continue to unfold. So there's a definite correlation between, the general political atmosphere, the mainstream media narratives around an election, and what we see voter ask in terms of questions when elections comes, or the information that they seek of their newsrooms and of the tip lines that I'll get the chance to speak about.
Yeah, let's talk about solutions then.
Right. So maybe I've just made a basic slide that explain what check is and what it does. In a way, our offering is a two-sided intervention that is AI powered. So what check allows organizations and newsrooms to do is to deploy AI generated chatbots on closed messaging apps, and this could be WhatsApp or Viber or Telegram or wherever your audience is, really, as a newsroom. But we combine this with programmatic community building, because the main idea is to say AI on its own cannot give a solution to the very wicked and very complicated problem of misinformation that we're currently faced with. It has to be human in the loop AI solutions. And I feel in a way, this is what makes the work that Meedan or Check that we're trying to do a little bit different than other AI, powered solutions, is that we're not trying to solve the technological wickedness by a tech solution. It's always a community-centered, human-in-the-loop solution. So the idea then is to create a very, straightforward software for newsroom to use, where you can source questions from your community or from your audience in times where they need it the most. So our pitch is to say, in times of elections, in times of crisis, when there's a hate speech against a specific community, is the time where your community needs the most answers from you. What we also know, and this is another trend that has come up, as we looked at what mainstream media coverage of elections has been in the lead up to election day, and then comparing that to the claims and questions and data that come through the tip lines during election day, there's often a mismatch between what journalists talk about and what voters want to know. So more often than not, media outlets do not tailor or exchange information with their communities, so to understand what their exact needs are, because the needs of these people are changing based on how their day-to-day lives are changing, based on what kind of information they're offered and they're consuming and they're looking at. And so the idea is our software attempts to basically address this very challenge. It's the exchange of information that we facilitate can respond to immediate needs of voters, because it allows voters to ask their journalists clear questions about what exactly the issues that they want to respond to or they want to address are.
Can I ask two questions before you continue? You mentioned programmatic community building and human-in-the-loop AI. Those are two terms that I think maybe our audience, as representative of the uninformed, what does that mean? What is programmatic community building?
Right. Going back to this idea of our focus on the larger world, I'd like to speak a lot about South-South collaboration, because I think it's an underexplored area in how we design our programs. So often solutions to the problems that happen across the larger world come from the North, with little insight into what the communities based across these countries actually need and what their priorities are. And the same applies to how mainstream media speaks to audiences in generally in larger terms. So the idea is to then design programs that respond to the specific needs of the communities, and the only way to do this is to co-design it with them. So how we run our programs is we've got program managers based in all the 4 regions. So
Right.
North Africa, Western Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean, and South Asia. These people are from those regions. They speak the languages. They understand the context. They're connected. They're people in their community. They basically can design programmatic interventions, be it training on digital literacy, training on digital security, organizing in-person events, cross-regional collaborations, but all of these basically account for the realities of the situations and of the countries where we operate, rather than just having one way to frame our interventions everywhere we go. So
Yeah.
that is a bit on co-designing community initiatives that
Gotcha.
respond to the needs of the people that you're speaking to.
Okay.
And on human in the loop, and we'll be able to cover this, I think, talk about it a little bit more when we talk about how check works, is that our software works best when the tip lines, so the space where the chatbots can take questions and answer them, are staffed by humans, because it's never going to be, as I was saying, a fully AI generated solution. Sometimes the question is quite straightforward. We can match it to our database and give a very straightforward answer. Is it true that, or can you let me know if, or can you verify, depending on how you ask question, are we having tornadoes and big catastrophic, flooding because we have a gay community in the city where we live? This is quite straightforward. We can match it to an existing database and we can say no. Often the claims and questions, because they're asked by humans and not by a bot, are a little bit more complicated. And so it takes a human to come in the middle and verify and fact check and cluster and do the work of verification in the background. And in that sense, we're creating a solution where, yes, we're taking advantage of the affordances of tech, but also recognizing that human content moderation is always going to be an important part of how we do our work.
Okay, so if a journalist is listening to this and going, "Oh, that's really interesting. I want to do check." How do they start the process of bringing it into their newsroom?
Great, that's a great question. So you go on the website and you request a demo. That's the first thing to do. And then we'll get in touch and say, we're going to show you what check is and how it works. And if we establish that it's useful for you and your newsroom and your community, then we set you up with a tip line. And then, obviously there's issues with who's going to pay for that tip line. We've got grants that support the use of check. So we subsidize the use of check by media organizations that are based across the larger world, because we fundraise for that work. But if organizations are based across in the global north, we need to, those licenses need to be bought, but it's a very, affordable sort of use of very useful technology.
Okay. This is not, or is it something a freelance journalist could use with their audience?
That's a good question. We want to make it useful, I think, for lone single person use. Some features of check are, for example, there's a newsletter feature that allows you to push a newsletter towards your audience, to tell them about the things you're writing about, the things that you care about, the issues that currently you're thinking through. Probably at this stage, check is better used when it's a staffed newsroom and there's journalists, as we call journalists in the loop, sitting and helping staff the tip line. For example, we often also recommend that audience engagement teams are engaged in the process, so that traffic is brought into the tip lines more productively and more efficiently. It helps if you've got an RSS feed, because then that helps you import your content into the system. So in a way, the tool is designed for a newsroom that has got an existing audience and is looking for a way to better engage with its audience at times when the audience has got lots of questions. Doesn't stop you using it if you're a freelance journalist, obviously, but the tool is maximized for a number of journalists working together across newsrooms.
I want to bring in, we don't usually bring in questions this early, but Eva Monford has phrased this really well. when somebody decides to join your newsroom's check room, they're making that kind of active decision to avoid disinformation. But how do we reach people who aren't actively looking to avoid disinformation? How do we reach the normal people? Is there a way to, is there something in Czech that helps you reach more people?
That's a really good question as well. Yes. So we started with a pilot, which we called an incubator project.
Yeah.
It's basically working with existing newsrooms to build their audience, but also around issues of misinformation. Because you could be in newsroom, whether you're in grassroots independent media collective based somewhere across the larger world, you could have an audience to whom you speak about different issues, like economic something or political integrity, and misinformation sat outside of the conversation that you usually have with your people. So there is a way, and this is why I was earlier saying that's often a good idea to bring in your communications people, your engagement people. So and in that sense, it is always tech and program, because it is a solution where, as a team, you've taken a decision to use affordances of AI to respond to the queries of your audience, but it takes, some level of commitment from your team to want to tailor the chatbot to the needs of your audience. Ask yourself a question: in what language do you want to be speaking to these people? We haven't talked about hyperlocal languages, but Czech's ability to work in now 30 languages, and in some cases these are like underserved languages, makes it all the more important, because we know that AI solutions are designed by people in the West for people in the West. So having an AI solution that responds to the need of hyperlocal languages is also very important. So it takes it some level of customization. Czech isn't a software you just like click a button and you run away with. And this is why we like the idea of building a relationship with the people that we work with. We've been working with AFP and Reuters for years, for example, on election projects in Brazil, in the Philippines. We just wrapped up India and Mexico. Alongside the Reuters and AFP and Tegna and the big media organizations of the world, we've got, organizations based in Mexico, which I'm not going to mention in detail, or civil society groups. It's not only organization. You could be a civil society organization that you care about the issue about hate speech against women or LGBTQ communities, and this is what you want to be working on countering misinformation and hate speech against a specific group of people, and Czech is a good solution for you to do this. So it really depends on what the organization is, whether it's a civil society organizations or a newsroom, who your audience is, what does your audience need, like what kind of questions and claims would you be sourcing from them, be it in time of election or also when nothing's happening. I mean, some of the most interesting trends we've seen around hate speech is the one that circulates outside of moment of exceptions, when nobody's looking. And this is what makes it all the worthwhile, like, information to also look at and try and address.
Okay, so I'm sitting in a newsroom in South Africa. I want to set up a Telegram account to talk to voters in South Africa. I do the demo call. We've got enough resources. This is something that works. I install the software, add in my RSS feed, and start promoting on my website, hey, join our Telegram account. And we've got like 200 people who are saying, hey, I saw this, I saw this, I saw this. I have this question. Is this true? And we start responding. Where's the AI in this process?
So the number you have on Telegram or on WhatsApp, or you speaking to a bot, the first contact you have on the closed messaging app is not with a human, is with a chatbot. And that chatbot could be customized. As I was saying, you can give it a name, you can give it a UX design, you can make it male or non-binary, you can make it speak in a specific language. you ask that bot a question, and the bot would say, "Thank you very much for getting in touch. Just give me a second. I'm just gonna go and check this against my database." So the first level of AI is there. And then our machine learning team in the background been working on similarity. So what we do with similarity is whenever we get a new claim or question into check, the first thing we do is we look at it against the database that we have. But the other really exciting feature is that we're able to match together, to cluster together similar claims around the same issue. What this means is that if you are an organization that has got, you're based in Afghanistan or you're based somewhere else across the larger world, and you've got six teams working across 6 different cities for your elections, your teams can connect together the data sets. And I don't know, maybe did my screen share stop? Is it? Or can you still see my screen? Sorry.
No, we stopped the screen sharing.
I wanted to share, I wanted to show this about the share feed, because this feature makes it really exciting for Newsroom to work together. Because if it's one data set of questions and of claims, yes, is important. But what happens if you're in a country where you've got 10 newsrooms across 10 different cities and they all get together and share their feeds? Then that means when you get asked the question, the likelihood of your question being matched with an existing fact check is much higher. But also it means we can come up with narrative trends across audiences. And this is where the second level of AI, in answer to your question, comes in, is the clustering and the matching of the claim, and then the extraction of trends across languages, across geographic contexts, etc. So for example, to give you a very, very straightforward example of this, we wrapped up towards the early part of 2024 an election project that looked at trends in gender disinformation in times of elections in Pakistan and in Togo and in Argentina. So it was in 3 languages. It was in Urdu and in French and in Spanish, and it was in 3 geographic contexts. Each one of the partners we had their own tip line on check. So they received the questions from their audiences in their own languages around their elections. And then as the election wrapped up, we just finishing Pakistan because it was the latest one to finish. We looked at trends and how they circulated in each one of the countries separately. The next stage, where it becomes even nerdier and more exciting for the researchers here and the journalists interested in trends here, is to look whether there's a common trend in how gender disinformation circulate, but across languages and across geographic contexts. What this means is that if we understand how is this relevant to a bunch of fellows who are on the call here, is that if we understand how these trends circulate, then the messaging we're creating for our audiences in time of election responds to this exact trend. Then the programs we're designing for our community groups are programs that responds to the very evidence that's coming out of our data to say this is how people speak about other people in times of elections, so that the messaging of the media is actually tailored to the reality that's arising of the communities using the tech.
With the collaboration stuff, can you opt in or opt out to share your trends and data with other newsrooms and see their trends and data?
Absolutely. This is a brilliant question. Yes. At every step of the way, it's opt-in. We take data. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of data circulating on our tip line from a lot of different people. So the issue of data storage and data preservation is extremely important. We try and minimize as much as we can the data we collect. So we don't take like IP addresses from tip line users. We need we need single IDs. So in some cases, it's a phone number or it's a username. But that's about it in terms of the data. The data is encrypted as it circulates between our servers and the users, and as it's stored on our own servers, and it's stored in Ireland, so it follows GDPR norms of data storage. Now, when it comes to shared feeds, it's absolutely, even if you're part of a coalition that's working on the shared feed, you work throughout, and at any point you decide that your data is yours and you don't want to share it, you opt out. But that also means you don't have access to other people's data. For you to be able to access other people's data, you have to give access to yours. But where it becomes the most interesting, for example, we wrapped up the project in India. We had about 7 or 8 newsrooms working with us on the election trends, and they set up a shared feed and shared their data between them and looked at trends across their feeds. And that gives you, for a country as big as India, with the numbers of voters across the country, it gives you a huge insight into the trends of circulation of misinformation.
Yeah. I would be remiss not to kind of drill down on this question, or this answer. Obviously, data collection, we should all be very concerned when we hear data is being collected. What do you have in place to protect that data? You did already mention it's stored in Ireland, GDPR. Are there any other?
I mean, we have got in place all the SOC 2, accreditation. So we follow all the sort of digital safety and security standards that we have to follow. We have actually got a data values statement on the website that people can read.
Yeah.
The TORs, when you sign up for check, have got very detailed explanation of what we can and cannot do with your data. But I think the most important bits for us is that the data belongs to the people. We do not use their data for anything, even for the trends report. So even for the basic analysis of what I'm telling you right now, people have opted in for us to be able to say, yes, look at the trend and extract the trend. So the extractive nature of the relationship between tech platforms and organizations, especially across the larger world, is at the heart of the things we're trying to work up against.
Yeah.
So the very design of our relation with our partners is on a, we've had the same partners for years, like some of them have been there for decades. The data is theirs. We care very much about the safety and the preservation of it, but also we want to have as little as possible so that we are not in a situation where there's breaches or there's anything that, puts their data at risk.
Yeah. And if there were, for lack of a better example, a kind of Cambridge Analytica type actor who wanted to hack and try to get hold of what would be a very interesting data set, regardless of how limited it is. Do you have sort of proactive anti-hacking? Would you have processes in place to monitor and?
Yes. I mean, we've got a digital, our DevOps team is made of digital security experts. So as part of the people who work on our team are the people who train our partners on how do you keep your password safe? How do you preserve your digital identity? What to do and not do? We've got a bunch of partnerships, like for example, with Stolpoppy, with 1Password, that when somebody becomes a partner of our programs, they got access to a suite of tools that allows them to enhance the security and safety online. So, I mean, the running joke in Meedan is that it's so secure that we sometimes can't log into our own account.
Right.
That's the level of verification that it takes. I mean, if you're on a Slack channel, the ops, like the IT Slack channel is constantly people saying, "Can you let me in? It's my own email."
I've forgotten my fifth factor authentication. Okay, good. I do want to invite anyone who has questions to please add them to the Q&A or to the WhatsApp group. And before we get to the audience questions, I'm just very curious to know how enthusiastic and willing are newsrooms to collaborate and share data. You mentioned South-South collaboration. Are you seeing like an eagerness to collaborate across borders?
Absolutely. We've had some amazing partners. I mean, obviously it becomes more exciting when there's something happening. So in times of elections, in response to crisis, some of the most impactful work we've done has happened during elections, like the Philippines election 2022, the Brazil elections last year, the India-Mexico elections that we just wrapped up. And what's really interesting is what journalists are getting excited about
Mm.
is not only a newsroom coalition, is a coalition that's made of somebody like the TSC in Brazil or INE in Mexico, which are like electoral national institutes that build a coalition that has got a few newsrooms, but also civil society organizations. With the UK and the French model now, we're thinking about engaging journalism students because we're thinking, wait, this is a really good opportunity to integrate learning into curriculum design. That's a really good way to teach data journalism, is that if you're sitting on a tip line and looking at the feeds coming in and the kind of claims and questions that are coming through the tip lines. So this idea of a coalition of that brings together different actors within our public sphere, people who all have got something to say in times of crisis, in times of turmoil, in time of elections, and bring them together, give them the right kind of tech to do what they need to do, build alongside the tech, programmatic intervention, digital security training, digital safety, give them access to resources, and watch what happens. There's absolutely a lot of like, I don't want to say magic because it sounds very, redundant, but there's actually something extremely exciting about a coalition when it comes together for the right reasons and wants to work together. Some really great thing come out of it, definitely.
Are you surprised, knowing what you know about the competitive nature of the news industry, that there's so much willingness to collaborate?
I'm not so. I studied I'm a scholar in media studies, so I know all the all the things that people say about journalists, which are not true. So personally, I am not surprised. I feel like the reality is that journalists today are under so much pressure to respond so quickly, to try and cover so many different issues. How much of the AI should we use? How safe is it? How quickly can I respond? So just acknowledging the fact that the solution or the offering needs to match the need, be it of the newsroom themselves or of the communities that these newsrooms serve, is absolutely essential. And that's why we've got on our team ML researchers, engineers, but also journalists, like people who run our programs team are previous journalists and have worked in newsrooms and desks, because we understand the reality of how the newsroom works and what it needs, so that the solution could cater for those needs.
Yeah. Let's go to Samuel Thomas from Nigeria downstairs. He has a question about the AI. Go for it, Sam.
Right. Hi.
Hello.
Yeah. Thank you for that presentation. I have two questions actually. So one is I'm trying to know how I want to know how AI has influenced campaign messages in South Africa, India, and Indonesia. These are places that election has already been held. So you maybe check how AI influenced campaign messages from different political parties. And secondly, I will also want to know, knowing that Africa is a culture and languages shapes the community and society. So how do you deal with that challenges in trying to train your machine to dispel most of this misinformation? Because in that particular area, there are misinformation that is embedded into culture and it has been there for a very long time. So how do you deal with that?
Thank you. Thank you for the two questions. In terms of the first one, yes, it's not just, there's research that's been coming out of the effect of Gen AI on information integrity, be it in times of election rise, from across the larger world. We know that we've got evidence and data to support the fact that Gen AI has contributed to destabilizing democracy and sort of skewing conversations that happen around election integrity and democratic processes across the larger world. So this is not relevant to any of the, not particular to any of the regions. Basically, we've seen it happen everywhere. Obviously, in places like Brazil and India, because they're bigger countries. So the amount of traffic that's coming out is much larger than it is in Lebanon, for example, but it's true all across. There's a few things that we've identified as key questions, as key issues or problems in response to your question. The first thing is that we know that voters tend to turn to messaging apps in times of elections to get information And as I was saying earlier in my talk, the information that spreads in close messaging apps is often, unregulated and uncontrolled. So we know, for example, that specific age groups, people, more senior groups would tend to look to their peers in groups that exist on social media apps to ask questions about elections, ask questions to voters, etc. And these are unregulated spaces. This is the first one. The second one, that a big problem we have, is that the political use of text messages in messaging apps. So candidates organize campaigns on closed messaging apps and push information towards voters that's also unregulated. So this information cannot be fact-checked, like the information that would need to go on TV, for example. There's rules to what candidates can say or cannot say in terms of elections to voters on mainstream media. This is not the case on closed messaging apps. They can push any kind of information they want. And quite interestingly, actually, we've understood that the worst behavior doesn't tend to happen on the largest platforms. The worst behavior tend to happen on smaller apps, which are actually not prepared to handle it. So you'd see less on WhatsApp than you'd see elsewhere because of the use of it. Fourth, and I think most importantly right now, the biggest issue we've been facing as a civil society organization is that platforms have cut funding to third-party organizations, and they've cut their trust and safety teams. So not only are they relying on Gen AI tools to create content that is very cheap and can be pushed to thousands of people very quickly, but they've cut down the trust and safety teams from within the platforms, which meant that the level of regulation and content moderation that we had in Twitter previously, etc., and Meta no longer exists. The human rights team have been sacked. The trust and safety teams have been sacked. And that means that it made closed messaging apps even more vulnerable to the spread of mis and disinformation. So these are AI-connected problems that we've seen across context in the larger web. Now comes to your question about Africa. Obviously, it's a big continent, so I'm not going to speak about the continent. I'm going to speak about sub-Saharan Africa because these are the places where we have got the most active presence and team. We've got several of our team members based there and partners. To give you an example of the kind of work we do, we're currently designing a project that brings together organizations from across 10 countries across the larger world. So it's not only sub-Saharan Africa, but in Africa we've got Kenya and Tanzania. These are the two countries that we're working in, and I can explain why that is the case. But that brings people in these two countries with people in Bangladesh and India and Colombia and Sudan and the Western Sahara. So it's a network of 10 organizations. And what we want to do, it's about countering tech-facilitated gender-based violence against women, human rights defenders, and women decision makers and LGBTQ communities. So we've got a clear sense of what kind of hate speech targeting which communities. You have to be very specific in terms of what you're looking at, because otherwise you get lost in the thousands of, and so what we want to do is that we want to create this collaboration and allow these organizations to spend 2 years together fine-tuning large language models, so training algorithms on uncovering and responding to instances of gender-based violence in their local languages. So the whole project for 2 years is to collect data from these contexts on what does gender-based violence even mean? Because in each one of these contexts, it means something different. In each language, it means something different. So 1, to define it. 2, to identify the main trends so what are the main things that we say against these communities online? And then build a data set, annotate that data set for each organization. It's their own data set, obviously. And then use that to fine-tune large language model to train algorithms on better uncovering and better responding to these instances in specific languages, in specific contexts. So this is an example, hopefully an answer to your question, to how the answer to a very big problem is extremely hyper-local. And that is our approach. Our approach to say it is a global challenge, but the answer to it needs to account for the realities of where we are and the people we're speaking to.
Let's stay on the question of who you're able to choose to partner with, and go to Osama from Iraqi Kurdistan, and then we're going to go back to Nigeria for Jabedi's question.
أهلا أسامة.
Assalamu alaikum.
عليكم السلام.
Thank you so much for this presentation. Of course, going through a large part of your work has been about the Middle East, and since my project is about Iran, and then I just looking through the table you had for the elections, I couldn't see Iran, which they had an election in March. They're going to have one soon for a new president. So my question is, like, what is it that some countries make it on the list? I already see the United States, even though they're going to the polls in November, but like the ones they had in March and one perhaps soon, they're not on the list. So that's my first question. Second one is, like, do you have any connections with the Persian news organizations? Of course, I mean the ones outside the country, or perhaps human rights organizations, since part of your work is about documenting human rights violations. And of course, we had the Masa Amini protests in Iran about 2 years ago. Thank you.
Thank you, Osama, for the questions. On the Iran elections, the very honest, straightforward answer is we cannot do these projects without a partner. The idea is not for us to come and run an election project from the Bay Area. The idea is to have a local partner who's willing to work with us. So in this specific case, we did not have a partner working on the Iran election. That said, we've got a great partner called Fatabayanu, and it's a Jordanian group. You might be familiar with them, and we're working with them on Kurdistan elections. So there is a plan to they deployed the first Arabic-speaking chatbot using Czech. So that was in the aftermath of the Syria and Turkey earthquake last year, and they're going to do this one. I mean, we're just getting ready. I'm not sure if it's out or yet, to deploy a chatbot in Kurdish. So I'm very excited about the prospect of working in more languages. We have no connections with Persian human rights organizations, at least working. I mean, we do in terms of like women rights defenders sitting outside of Czech from a programmatic area, but I'm very open to any connections you would be willing to give me and help us create. I mean, if you ask me what's the best thing that would come out of this conversation, is that we continue a conversation after this first hour. So please do reach out. Caitlin's got my contact. I'd be very happy to start a conversation together about this. And I can then point you to Fatabayanu and their work on Kurdish. It might be interesting for your research.
Mashallah. And let me just, I'm going to mute you, sorry. Let me just follow up a little bit there. Is it fair to say that there needs to be a degree of press freedom present in a country in order for the newsroom to create enough content to respond to queries honestly, or can you go anywhere?
No, I think making this into a prerequisite to our ability to work beats the whole purpose of what we're trying to achieve. I think in some cases, what you might need to do is to work with, for example, there's lots of partners we work with that I will never mention on a call like this one because it's not safe for them to do so. But that doesn't, they're human rights defenders in areas, especially North Africa, Western Asia, and some APAC, we've seen crackdown on organization working with international groups and on disinformation projects from the government quite acutely. That said, we can put mechanisms in place for users to be anonymous, for contributions to be anonymous. So the level of digital safety and security that needs to be implemented to projects is adapted to basically who the audience is and what they're doing. In some cases, I think the obviously freedom of expression not being, or you not being able to receive funding even, right? Funding is a big problem if you're based in India, for example, to receive funding from an organization in the US, or if you're in North Africa, Western Asia as well. So so sometimes there's programmatic intervention that need to happen to make that better. So some digital literacy training that needs to happen, digital safety training. We need to use different kinds of tools when we're working with civic partners. But I'm absolutely adamant about we should not make, freedom. You want to make the commitment to freedom of expression a prerequisite of involvement, but not the prevalence of it in the country where you work.
Right. Great, thank you. Okay, we've got a kind of case study question from Chibedu in Nigeria, who says, we've got the local elections coming up, and there is little to nothing known about candidates and communities. So how could you implement something like check in that circumstance?
That's a great question. I mean, I love ideation questions.
Yeah.
So there's lots of things we could do. My first question to you would be, who are we working with? Are we working with newsrooms or journalists? Are we working with civil society organizations? Are we building a coalition of all of these people? Ideally, if you tell me what would your ideal project look like, is I'd say we'll have a partner in Nigeria who's willing to be a lead partner on it's often, we love it when there's an organization that comes and is in charge of bringing together everybody else, because we never want to be we want to be the people offering the tech solutions and the programmatic support. We don't want to be leading election projects in people's countries. That's not the point. And so we find this lead organization. This could be a newsroom. So say AFP in Nigeria, or the organizations for the protection of women's rights in Nigeria. I'm just making names up.
GeneCo and
yeah, we actually have got partners
Guardian,
work on women's rights.
Nigeria Guardian.
Exactly.
Cool.
Come together and say, right, in the lead up to the elections, we're going to set up this coalition, and it's made of X amount of civil society organizations, freelance journalists. We want to involve journalism students from these two universities to help with fact-checking on election day. And we want to run our tip line on WhatsApp, because this is where our most audience is. You request a demo for check, we give you a demo, we come and speak to you, we look at who's your favorite, who's your target audience, who are the beneficiaries, what kind of security measures need to be in place, do we need to do any digital literacy training, do we need to do a bit of introduction about what AI is, or how to do impact assessment for this project. So obviously we haven't even looked at how do we measure success with these projects, what indicators look like, etc. So we've established this. Then you go off and start talking to your people. You've got a number that you publicize, and you say the main aim of this project is to actually debunk misinformation about women candidates or about candidates across the elections. So what you would do is you build this campaign using check as one tool, but there's lots of other stuff, newsletters, explainers. You create a page on your website, you make it into an email that you push to your people on a quarterly basis, etc., where every week, for example, you choose one candidate and you do an interview with them, or you debunk false claims about them. We know that female candidates are at the forefront of the fight against hate speech in times of elections. Everybody hates women candidates, wherever we're looking. So that is one thing, debunking myth about female candidates. Or for example, for us it's very important to say, it's not just about misinformation, is how does this connect to climate activism, to information integrity across, so economic, social, political. And part of this could run on check, but also a big part of it could be running on the events that you organize in person and online, conversations like this one, where you bring people together, you invite one of the candidates to answer people's questions. Those questions could be coming through the tip line. So you could have a candidate sit and sort questions through check. So there's lots of ways we can get very creative as project program design, as long as we know you, you know us, we know what you need, we trust each other, and we really want to do this together.
Okay, Chibedu, you've got your work cut out for you. Get in touch. Before we do run out of time, let's go again. You said something there. How do you measure success? I heard impact studies. Tell me more.
Yes, I mean, I love impact questions because that was my previous job before like I took over programs at Meedan. So we do take impact assessment very seriously. Our theory of change has been an iterative exercise that we've done with our entire staff. So engineers, researchers, DevOps, ops, everybody from across the organization contributes to thinking through what our theory of change looks like. We've got a set of indicators, organizational indicators. So these are quantitative and qualitative. And we've got an M&E framework that program managers basically maintain in the lead up to and the aftermath of every project we do. The bit that I'm the most excited about is we don't do impact assessment for reporting purposes, that it's actually embedded, it's threaded into project design. So from the first day we come up with a cool idea for something, the first question that we ask is how you're going to measure this, because evidence or it didn't happen. So unless we're able, because the issues we're talking about are so important and are so vital, and yet they're so vague. When you say something like democratic integrity, like it could mean nothing, because if it's just a concept that you don't just like actually engage with, it's not really helpful. And the only way to make it helpful is to actually have evidence to support all these claims you make. So yeah, we do take it very seriously.
We don't have a lot of time left, but you said something that really made my ears stand up earlier, and I do want to make time to talk about it. You said, how can we make conversations about AI and technology more accessible and less scary? And you said that this is something your team has spent a lot of time discussing. And I really do feel that newsrooms and journalists need to have these conversations too. What pointers would you give news organizations as they begin to use things like personalization in their own workflows? How do they remain transparent with their audiences and communicate those changes in a way that's not scary?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. There is, I mean, obviously we've got not much time, so I'm trying to be as concise as I can.
Yeah, please give us a 16-page response to this.
My straightforward answer is to say, know that everybody else is struggling with the same questions.
Yeah.
No one's figured it out yet. We're all like, we are an organization that's working on AI solution. We have an amazing machine learning team in-house, and we still write memos about, is it okay to use ChatGPT in, so coming up with ethical uses of the tech and AI solutions that we've got is a question that everybody's thinking through. So my answer is speak to civil society organizations, to community groups, to independent media outlets, to grassroots journalists who are definitely fiddling with the same and haven't got the infrastructural, support that you have as a journalist who works for a major newsroom. Reach out to people, do the counter-natural thing to ask the question of, how are you dealing with that one? Should we have a conversation about it? Reach out to us, come speak to us at Meedan, because it's exactly the kind of questions. What does AI equity means, and where does it sit in our strategy, and how do we engage with it? So I think it takes a collective to sort of solve these big problems. Reaching out to people and being honest about what you're good and you're not good at, being honest about what you're comfortable and not comfortable with, and imagining a way where you carve your own use of AI, that your own use, this exactly the same that we did with the phone, with TV, is just yet another tech solution. It's not, you can set up the limits if you understand how it works. So my answer is literacy, but like collective, community-driven, community-centered literacy enhancement. Always go back to the community. That's always the answer.
I really love that. Dima, I'm really sorry if you get 50 phone calls in the next week asking you to come and do.
Haven't got my phone number.
Interventions. But I'm also really glad if you get 50 phone calls in the next week, because
if I have 50 phone calls, there's a problem with my
emails, no phone calls. But yeah, just thank you for your time and thank you for this work, because it's it's nice to have a little breathing space of hope in such a difficult year. And I do feel hopeful after talking to you that people are out there looking for solutions and willing to collaborate. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. It was such a good discussion.
We
Great to
are
meet
back.
you.
We're back next week with Alberto Cairo and Simon Rogers, who I consider the data visualization gods, talking about what to do with Olympics data. So join us again. We're a bit later next week to accommodate the San Francisco time zone, but do join us. Thank you, Dima. Go well.